The bull came out of the cane like a nightmare, given muscle and breath. And in that instant Silas Bennett understood that history does not always arrive with speeches or flags. Sometimes it comes with hooves pounding the earth and a scream tearing the air in two. In the summer of 1877, Mississippi breathed heavy. The war had ended. The chains had been broken on paper, and yet the land still belonged to the same hands. The plantation was quieter than it once had been, but it was not kinder. Fields of cane and cotton stretched like open wounds beneath the sun, and the people who worked them still woke before dawn, still bent their backs to soil that had never loved them back. Silas was 15, long-limbed and sharp-eyed, with hands already rough enough to belong to a man twice his age. He had been born enslaved and freed as a child, but freedom in that year tasted like dust and debt. He lived on the Bennett plantation because there was nowhere else to go, working for credit that never quite caught up to the cost of breathing. He had learned the land the way a boy learns a language, by listening. The cicadas that screamed before storms. The low places where snakes slept cool beneath roots. The moods of animals, especially the bulls kept for breeding and plowing, creatures bred for strength and rarely for calm. Silas had been told since he could walk to stay away from old Samson, the red-brown bull with the torn ear and the eyes that never softened. Samson had killed a dog once, gored a fence post clean through another time. Men spoke of him in half-jokes and full warnings. That morning, the heat pressed down early. Silas was mending a split rail near the cane when he heard the bell ring from the big house. Sharp, urgent, wrong for the hour. He froze, hammer in hand, listening. The bell rang again, then stopped mid-peal, as if grabbed. A sound followed that didn't belong to the land. A woman's cry, thin with terror. He ran. The big house rose pale and wide beyond the fields, its columns flaking, its grandeur worn thin by time and loss. Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb had inherited it along with debts and a name that still opened doors in town. She was not old, not young, a widow of the war years with hair already streaked silver. Silas had seen her only from a distance, gliding across porches, voice controlled even when angry, eyes sharp enough to cut. She spoke to him rarely, and when she did it was with the careful politeness people used when they did not know where to place you. Silas rounded the side of the house and skidded to a stop. Old Samson was loose. The bull had broken through the far fence, the wood splintered like matchsticks. His head was low, nostrils flaring, hooves tearing divots from the ground as he charged the open yard. Mrs. Whitcomb stood near the rose trellis, her skirts caught on thorns, one shoe lost, the bell rope tangled around her wrist. She was frozen, eyes wide, breath coming in sharp, useless gasps. The distance between them and the bull was closing fast, each thunderous step a countdown. There were other men on the property, but they were far, fields away, tools abandoned as shouts rose. Silas felt the world narrow to sound and motion, the scrape of hooves, the dry rattle of cane leaves, the pounding in his own ears. He did not think of history or gratitude or what anyone would say later. He thought of his mother's voice telling him how to climb trees fast. He thought of Samson's blind side. He thought of how fear could make an animal stupid if you gave it something else to hate. He grabbed a fallen fence rail and ran straight at the bull. "Hey!" he shouted, the word ripped raw from his throat. He swung the rail against the ground, then hurled it. It struck Samson's flank and bounced off, but it was enough. The bull's head snapped toward Silas, rage finding a new target. The charge shifted, earth exploding beneath hooves as the animal turned. Silas ran. He cut toward the oak at the edge of the yard, legs burning, lungs screaming. He could hear Samson behind him, feel the heat of the animal's breath, the vibration of each step through the soles of his feet. The oak loomed ahead, its lowest branch just within reach if you jumped right. Silas leapt, fingers grazing bark, slipping. Pain lanced up his arm as he caught hold and hauled himself up, scraping skin, heart hammering. Samson slammed into the trunk. The impact shook the tree. Leaves rained down. Silas clung, breath sobbing out of him, as the bull backed up and charged again. Wood groaned. The second hit cracked the trunk with a sound like a gunshot. Silas climbed higher, hands slick with blood and sap, while below the bull bellowed, maddened. From the porch, Mrs. Whitcomb watched, one hand pressed to her mouth. The world she knew, of order, of distance, of who was meant to risk and who was meant to be protected, was breaking in front of her eyes. The shouting grew closer. Men burst from the fields with ropes and poles. Someone fired a pistol into the air. Samson wheeled, confused, rage splitting in too many directions at once. When the men finally dragged the bull away, breathless and shaking, Silas slid down the far side of the oak and collapsed into the grass. For a moment, no one spoke. Mrs. Whitcomb crossed the yard slowly, skirts torn, hands trembling. She stopped a few feet from Silas, looking down at the boy who lay gasping at her feet, blood streaking his arm, chest heaving. The heat pressed in, the cicadas resumed their song, and the plantation seemed to hold its breath. "Are you hurt?" she asked finally, her voice not steady, not distant, human. Silas tried to stand and failed. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. He did not know what came next. Gratitude could be as dangerous as anger. He had saved her life, but the world had never been kind to boys like him for doing the right thing. As Mrs. Whitcomb turned to call for help, Silas looked back at the oak, its trunk split and bleeding sap, and wondered what price the land would demand for what he had just done. The bull was gone, but the danger was not. Something had shifted, and Silas could feel it, heavy as the heat, waiting to fall. "If you want me to continue with part 2, tell me to go on." Silas woke to the smell of lye soap and crushed mint, his arm burning as if fire lived beneath the skin. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him was too clean, the air too still. When he turned his head, pain flared and the world sharpened into a small white room at the back of the big house. A place he had only ever seen from the doorway when supplies were stored or sickness kept people away from the rest of the household. Mrs. Whitcomb sat beside the bed. She had changed her dress, but not her face. The composure she wore like armor had cracks in it now. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on Silas as if he might vanish if she looked away. "You're awake," she said softly. Silas pushed himself up on his uninjured elbow, wincing. "Yes, ma'am." The words came automatically, drilled into him long before freedom had been declared. He glanced down at his arm, bandaged thick from wrist to shoulder. The blood had been cleaned away, but the memory of bark tearing skin was still sharp. "You shouldn't move yet," she said. "The doctor says you were lucky. Another inch, and the bone would have." She stopped herself, swallowed. "You saved my life." The sentence hung between them, heavy and awkward, like a thing neither of them knew where to put. Silas nodded again, unsure what was expected. Gratitude could be dangerous. It could turn into obligation, or worse, resentment. He had seen men beaten for less complicated reasons than saving a white woman from death. Mrs. Whitcomb stood abruptly and crossed to the window. Outside, the yard looked unchanged, sunlight washing over the grass as if nothing had happened. "My husband was killed by a horse," she said suddenly, not turning around. "Thrown and dragged. The doctor said it was quick. I never believed them." Silas listened, eyes fixed on the bandage. He had never heard her speak of her husband before. He had never heard her speak of fear at all. "I thought I understood danger," she continued. "War takes men. Accidents take fools. That's what I told myself." She turned back to him then, and there were tears in her eyes she did not bother to hide. "I was wrong." She reached into her pocket and placed something on the bedside table. Coins. Silver. More than Silas had ever held at once. His chest tightened. "This is for you," she said. "For what you did." Silas stared at the money and felt something cold settle in his stomach. Payment made things simple. Payment closed doors. "Thank you, ma'am," he said carefully, though every instinct told him this was not the thing that mattered. She seemed to understand. After a moment, she pushed the coins aside. "No," she said quietly. "This isn't enough. And it isn't right." That was when the first knock came at the door. It was Mr. Callahan, the overseer, hat in hand, eyes darting between Silas and Mrs. Whitcomb. He smelled of sweat and authority. "Ma'am," he said, "the men are restless." Word spread fast. Folks saying things. "About the bull?" she asked. "About the boy," Callahan replied. Silas felt his jaw tighten. He had become a story now, and stories were never safe in places like this. Some would say he was brave. Others would say he was reckless. A few would say he had forgotten his place. Mrs. Whitcomb's voice hardened. "What kind of things?" "That he's getting ideas," Callahan said carefully. "That saving you might make him think he's owed." Silas looked away. He had known this was coming. The land had rules older than any law written in ink, and those rules punished boys who crossed invisible lines, even to do good. Mrs. Wickham did not look away. "He is owed," she said. The words were sharp enough to cut. "He is owed his dignity, at the very least." Callahan shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, folks won't see it that way. They already don't like that he ran at the bull instead of calling for help. Some are saying it was reckless, that you were put in danger because—" "Enough," she snapped. "You will tell them this. Silas Bennett acted to save a life. Mine. And if there is any punishment to be discussed, it will be discussed with me." Callahan nodded stiffly and backed out of the room. When the door closed, silence rushed back in. Silas finally looked at her. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I don't want trouble." She met his gaze, and for the first time there was no distance at all. "I know," she said. "But trouble has a way of finding those who survive when they're not supposed to." Over the next days, Silas healed under the roof of the big house. It was an arrangement that unsettled everyone. Some servants avoided his eyes. Others whispered prayers of thanks when they thought no one could hear. The men in the fields watched him differently when he returned to work, not with admiration, but with something closer to fear. A boy who could face down a bull could face down other things too. Mrs. Wickham began to call for him, not for labor, but for conversation. She asked about his mother, long buried in unmarked ground. About what he remembered of Freedom Day, the confusion and hope tangled together. Silas answered carefully, still unsure where the edge was, but something in her listening made him speak more than he meant to. "I don't want to stay here forever," he admitted one evening as the sun bled red into the fields. "I want land of my own, or at least work where my name matters." She was quiet for a long time. "I have land," she said finally. "Not all of it productive. Not all of it claimed." Silas's heart began to race. Hope was dangerous. It could kill you just as surely as a bull if you let it run too far. Before he could respond, a shout rose from beyond the yard. Angry. Urgent. Callahan came running, face pale. "Ma'am," he said, breathless. "There's trouble at the fence. Some men from town. They're saying the bull should have been put down, and so should the one who provoked it." Silas stood despite the pain in his arm. He could feel the old rules reasserting themselves, heavy and unforgiving. Saving a life had bought him time, nothing more. Mrs. Whitcomb straightened, her face set in a way Silas had never seen before. "Then they'll have to come through me," she said. Outside, voices grew louder, closer. Silas looked at the woman who now stood between him and the crowd, and he understood that whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. The bull was gone. The debt was not. The men from town gathered like a storm that had learned how to speak. Their voices rose and fell beyond the fence, sharp with judgment, heavy with old certainties. Silas stood just behind Mrs. Whitcomb on the porch, his injured arm bound close to his chest, his heart beating hard enough to shake his ribs. He had faced a bull without thinking. This was worse. Animals followed instinct. Men followed rules that pretended to be laws. "They say he provoked it," one voice called out. "Say he wanted to show off." Another spat into the dust. "A boy like that don't run at danger unless he's forgetting himself." Mrs. Whitcomb stepped forward before Silas could move. The late afternoon light caught her face, and for the first time she did not look like the mistress of a dying plantation, but like a woman who had decided something and would not be moved. "He ran toward danger because I was standing in it," she said clearly. "Because I froze. Because I was afraid." The crowd quieted, surprised by the confession more than the defense. Silence rippled outward, uneasy. "I am alive because of Silas Bennett," she continued. "And if any man here believes that courage should be punished, then you are welcome to explain to me why my blood is worth more than his." No one answered. Callahan shifted at the edge of the porch, torn between loyalty and habit. The men exchanged looks. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry. A few looked thoughtful, as if a door had cracked open in a place they'd never dared touch. Finally, an older man spoke. "What are you saying, Mrs. Whitcomb?" She didn't hesitate. "I am saying this land will not take another life to preserve its comfort. I am saying Silas will leave this place with more than scars and thanks. I am saying the debt here runs in the other direction." The words settled slowly, like ash. Within the week, papers were drawn. Not promises. Not talk. Deeds. A narrow stretch of land at the far edge of the property, rocky but honest, was signed over in Silas's name. It was not charity. She made sure of that. It was payment long overdue. When she handed him the documents, her hands shook. "This doesn't erase what this place has done," she said. "But it is what I can give." Silas held the papers like they might disappear if he blinked. His name written cleanly at the top felt unreal, heavier than chains, lighter than hope. "Thank you," he said, and this time the words did not feel dangerous. He left the plantation at dawn. The fields were quiet, the land breathing out mist as if relieved to let him go. He carried little, some food, a blanket, the deed folded close to his heart. At the edge of the oak where the bark still bore the scar of Samson's rage, he stopped. The tree had survived, split, but standing. So had he. Mrs. Whitcomb watched from the porch, small against the wide house behind her. They did not wave. Some things did not need gestures. Silas walked until the sun climbed, and the ground beneath his feet felt different, less owned. The land he claimed was not easy. Stones cut his hands. Crops failed before they learned to grow. But the soil answered him in a way the plantation never had. It gave back exactly what he put in, no more, no less. Years later, people would tell the story wrong. They would say the mistress was kind. They would say the boy was lucky. They would smooth the edges until the danger was gone. But the truth lived quieter. A boy ran toward death because it was the only choice that felt human. A woman learned that survival creates a debt no money can pay. And a piece of land, once fed by suffering, became the beginning of something earned. Silas Bennett never became famous. His name did not reach textbooks or monuments. But he lived. He worked land that answered to him. He married. He told his children about the day fear tried to decide his fate, and failed. History often forgets people like Silas because remembering them asks something of us. It asks us to admit that courage can come from the places we are taught to overlook. That change is sometimes born not from power, but from a single choice made in a heartbeat. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel the weight of a moment history tried to bury, then you already understand what this channel exists for. These are the lives that built the world we stand on. These are the names that deserve to be carried forward. Remember Silas Bennett. And if you want more forgotten stories brought back into the light, stay with the Forgotten Cell.